The idea of work-life balance is based on a reality that no longer exists. We live in a digitally blended environment where work can permeate into every dimension of life outside of the 9 to 5. Travel, weekends, holidays, and most worryingly, sleep time. This pervasiveness of work sits at the root of why so many of us, regardless of how wonderful our job might be, are burning out or becoming resentful of its role in our lives. In this show, we talk to Scott Shute, who takes us to a reimagining of work where our spiritual needs are met, because we can operationalize tuning into our consciousness as a continuous act. Scott, who led this approach at LinkedIn, gives us a deep and practical approach to being able to navigate this most challenging of shifts that we need to make to our mindset if we're going to thrive in a world of rising demand and increasing uncertainty. Take a breath and tune in.
Hi friends, welcome to The Evolving Leader, the show born from the belief that we need deeper, more accountable, and more human leadership to solve our greatest challenges. I'm Scott Allender.
And I'm John Gomes.
How are you feeling on this Friday, Mr. Gomes?
Oh, it's been a long week and a long day, so I am feeling that natural, slightly depleted, but very energized by this conversation and really looking forward to it. How are you feeling, Scott?
I'm feeling, a little depleted as well. It's May-cember, where my kids are in all the year-end sort of wrapping up school kind of moments, and so there's lots of carting them around. I'm their official unpaid Uber driver, and I usually get just about the same notice as an Uber driver. They like, I need a ride right now, and you can wait in the parking lot until I'm done because I'm going to need a ride home as well. And so we're in that full mode, so I'm feeling a little tired and ready for that, but I'm also super excited about today. We're joined by somebody that I've had a chance to speak to a little bit offline before us joining, and he's got a great story and he's doing great work in the world, because today we're joined by Scott Shute. Scott was, as he describes it, Mr. Corporate America on the outside, but on the inside he was battling with the desire to allow his spiritual wisdom to have a voice in the boardroom. And this led to a transformational shift from Vice President of Customer Operations at LinkedIn to its Head of Mindfulness and Compassion Programs. And that's a story that I know we're both really keen to hear today. And in 2023, he founded Changing Work to curate the best practices of conscious business and make them easily accessible to all through a community of coaches and practitioners. Scott, welcome to The Evolving Leader.
Hey, thanks very much for having me. Glad to be here.
Scott, welcome to the show. How are you feeling today?
I am feeling pretty good. I'm getting ready to go on a photography adventure. One of the things I do is landscape photography. So I'm about to go for a week by myself in Oregon and do Oregon coasts and waterfalls. All of the good stuff there.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So let's, if we can, let's just dive into your internal struggle that I mentioned at the beginning. So you felt you had this internal struggle having climbed to the top of a career ladder in one of the world's most high-profile and successful companies. Tell us about that. Tell us about the struggle, Scott.
Well, I think the struggle, and I don't think it's unique to me, for all of us, is how do we be our true selves? How do we be a great person? How do we be a humane and compassionate person and still be successful at work? When I was a middle manager, I looked up at all of the C-suite in that company I was in, all the VPs, and I thought, man, do you have to be a jackass to be a VP here? Because it sure seems like it. And I didn't, that was only the second company I had worked for, so I didn't have that many data points, and it seemed true at that place. And I always wondered, how's this going to work? And I struggled with this idea of, well, maybe I should leave corporate America, right? Maybe I should leave corporate America and go do something that is more meaningful. whether that's a nonprofit or in education or in something that felt more meaningful. But, I would kind of check in, and my inner guidance would say, no, you're good. Stay where you are. Stay where you are. And eventually led me over time, 15 or 20 years later, I was at LinkedIn, and I got to experience, for me, what I've seen as the best that I've seen, a really amazing culture and really amazing leadership. Our CEO, Jeff Weiner, at the time, was talking about compassion. He was talking about mindfulness. And that was beautiful. It gave this comfort for me to be who I am. Because who I am is, I've had a spiritual practice. I've had a meditation or contemplation practice since I was 13. And so that's who I am. It's not like I found it later in life. I've been teaching since I was in college. It's a huge part of my life. It's just one that I never brought to work. And so I thought, well, maybe this is a place where I can bring that to work. So I led one meditation session on a Thursday afternoon. And that first time there was one dude there besides me. And I'm sure he was just as terrified as I was, because, I never saw that guy again. But the next week there were 3, and then there were 5, and then it was a regular thing. And then I became the executive sponsor of our mindfulness program. We didn't have one, so we built one. And over time, 3 or 4 years later, it turned into a full-time gig. I turned it into the head of mindfulness and compassion programs through another series of events. And so that's kind of the transition. So for me, now my work is, how do I help people realize they don't have to leave work to feel whole? Right? Work can be a place that is healing. Work can be a place that is inspirational. Work can be a place that fulfills us. And it usually doesn't.
Before we get on to some of those bigger topics, we've talked to several researchers and practitioners of mindfulness, and I'm really interested to get into the specifics of how you adopted it. And you said you started this as a teenager. What are the struggles you experience or still have in practicing it? And more importantly, how do you believe? What do you believe it enables in you?
So for me, the caveat is, everything I do at work, I find a bridge to be secular, and I find a bridge to speak the language of people at work, right? I spent 20 years as an operations guy. I want everything I do to be super practical. That said, for me, I would draw a distinction between mindfulness and contemplation. And so what I do in my personal world is more of a contemplation. And that is trying to find a direct connection to the divine. And so while mindfulness, in my limited opinion, is about the mind and quieting the mind, in my personal practice, I want to go beyond that. I'm trying to develop a direct link between me as soul, which I would describe as, a spark of the divine, and the broader, whatever you want to call it, the great mystery, or God, or the divine, or the universe, or whatever your term is for it. And so for me, the struggle, I wouldn't describe it as a struggle. It's the best thing in my life.
Yeah.
Right? The struggle is, making time. The struggle is doing it in the quote right way, instead of just kind of out of rote, because I've been doing this for 40 years. But when I do it, it's beautiful. And I think one of the things you asked me was, what does it allow for me in my life? It allows for me to have clarity. It allows me to have less stress. It allows me to have a calmer set of emotions. It allows me to deal with incredibly hard things in a very stable way.
No, the reason why I asked about the experience of doing it is because some of the people who have been we've been talking to about this talk about the battle to, and they are coming at it from a mindfulness perspective rather than your deeper approach, and that kind of like just that the minute by minute experience of trying to do it being a battle of keeping in that conscious space and shutting out other thoughts and feelings and so on. And
Sure.
how that helps them to alleviate suffering and to be able to embrace things in a much bigger way. I was really also asking it from like, what's it like? How do you experience that process? And you've been doing it for so long. What can you see the journey you've been through in doing that?
Oh, for sure. Well, let me tell a story. So at work, I experiment with different things, and one of the, I'd introduce people to different types of practices. Everything from just the quiet, still observation to some gentle repetition to visualization. And we were using a mantra one day. And I like the mantra Hu. Some people use Om. I like Hu. It's for me, it acts like a tuning fork to that deepest part of us. And we sang it together for, let's call it 15 minutes. And afterwards, there's maybe 8 or 9 of us in a circle. And afterwards, I asked one of the new guys, I said, well, what was your experience like? And he says, yeah, it didn't work for me. And I thought, oh, geez, okay. And internally, I'm like, kind of starting to feel self-conscious. I'm like, okay, well, let me get curious. So tell me more. Tell me more about your experience. And he says, I wasn't able to get my mind to go completely blank. And I went, But I said, well, how do you feel? He goes, oh, I feel great. I feel so light. I feel so like energized. Like this is the most relaxed. This is the best I've felt in 20 years. And we all laughed. I'm like, dude, it worked. What do you think we're doing here? This is not about making the mind go quiet. That's not the goal.
Well, this is exactly why I'm asking, because so many people have got like a set of assumptions about what this whole thing is about, that even when they haven't done it, that might be preventing them from entering into the process.
Exactly. So, the best type, the most powerful type of practice you can do, scientifically proven, sort of. The most powerful type of practice you can do is the one you'll actually do. Meaning, there's something for everyone. Right? And each person can find something that fits them, because we're all coming at it from a different consciousness. We're all coming at it from a different set of personality and experience. But whatever it is that helps us attune, not attain, right? Our whole life is spent attaining. But whatever can help us attune, for me, to that deepest part of us, right? And maybe it's sitting in quiet. Maybe for me, it's going and doing photography in a beautiful spot and just being quiet. Maybe for some people, it's fishing on a still lake in the morning. But all of those things can also be done in a way that doesn't attune. I can go do photography and be really anxious about getting the shot before the sunrise, or I can be fishing and only thinking about the catch and not the quiet. I can be meditating, but I'm, pondering what's my action list instead of really trying to attune. So part of it is the practice, and part of it is the quality of the practice. Part of it is the energy that we bring to it. So when we do that, when we have it with intention, then that's when the good stuff happens.
Yeah, thank you.
I love that what you said. The best practice you can do is the practice that you'll actually do. So you've touched on some of the benefits that you get from your practice, and you touched on that story. What's the why for organizations? What's the why for bringing this kind of practice in that people will get from it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm a business guy. I want to talk about ROI too. I think about the history of work a little bit, right? Just to put things in context. So for thousands of years, the work experience for workers was not great, right? You had kings and slaves in the old days, or maybe not so old days. You had indentured servants and landowners, all during the agrarian age. And then in the industrial age, imagine we're all sitting in a factory making the same thing, and still as workers, we're probably seen as just cogs in the machine. But in today's world, work looks like this, or we're all in our home offices, or we're connected digitally. And in the information age, especially a company like LinkedIn or any company that is basically a digital company, we don't make products. Our product is data, which means our product is people. I don't mean it so crassly, but the biggest resource, the biggest asset that a company has is its people. So it makes sense that you want your people to be at their best, right? You think about 100 years ago or whatever, if you're in a manufacturing environment and the machine that made 70% of your revenue was not doing well, right? The machine is over there humming in the corner, but it's like clanking instead of humming. Would there be any debate at all on the ROI of fixing the machine or doing maintenance on the machine? Would we say, oh, this is our most important machine. Do you think we should keep it up? Like, do you think we should oil it or like take care of it? Well, that's the same question. So, as an example, at work, in bigger companies, they'll have a gym at work. And I'll ask, well, what's the ROI of the new rowing machine that the gym, the head of the gym put in? Did you ask them? It's like, no, you didn't ask them, because what you know instinctively is that when our employees are physically healthy, they're going to be better at work. Or when we drop the air conditioning, I'm going to speak in Fahrenheit. Sorry for your UK listeners. If we drop the air conditioning from 78 degrees down to 70 so people are more comfortable, did we ask about the ROI for that? No, because we want our people to be at their best. Okay, so if you appreciate the gym, how many of your employees need for their job to run a 6-minute mile? And how many of your employees for their job need to bench press twice their weight? People laugh like, okay, well, pretty much nobody. But how many of your employees would you like to be mentally focused and emotionally stable? Oh, all of them, right? And so I believe that we should be spending, whatever we're spending on the gym, we should be spending 10x or 100x that on mental well-being. So I hope it's obvious, but if it's not, this all leads to when employees are at their best, they're more engaged, they're more creative, they're way more productive. You get better results for your customers. You get better results long-term for the company. It's not that complicated.
So building on that, you cite specifically research suggesting that companies that operate using basic conscious business practices were 1,400% more profitable than the S&P average. Can you unpack that a little bit more?
Sure.
Can you tell us why that is?
Sure. I'm citing the work of Raj Sisodia and the team that wrote the books Firms of Endearment and later Conscious Capitalism. And at the root of it, what does it mean, these practices? Well, I like to keep it simple. It's essentially when we solve for the whole instead of the part, or we solve for all of the stakeholders instead of just the shareholders. Meaning that when a company creates a balance on purpose of its shareholders, yes, because we have to have a good business model, but also its customers, creating extraordinary value for customers over the long term, and its employees, creating a great place to work for its employees so employees can do their best work. When there's a balance between the three, this is when companies are the most successful. And they cite it as, yes, 14x or 1,400% more profitable than the S&P average. And if we break it down into why, I like thinking about it like this. Think about your primary relationship, whether it's a wife or a spouse or a kid or a mother or whoever. Think about your primary relationship and your own goal. Why are you in that relationship? Well, what do we want to be happy in all our relationships, right? Well, let's say if I'm in my relationship, my path to happiness is, for me to be happy, I'm going to insist that I get my way 100% of the time. It seems like a good idea, but you guys are laughing, right? You know that is not the path to long-term happiness. It's counterintuitive, right? Like, to be happy, I should get what I want. But the truth is, if I only get what I want, then the other person's going to be miserable, and I'm not going to be in that relationship that much longer. So we learn to create a balance. And by that balance, we learn, that's actually the path to happiness. And it's exactly the same way for companies, right? We want to, as a company, make money, of course. For some companies, that's why they're in business. But the truth is, when we solve for the whole, when we solve for customers, when we solve for employees, that's the path to making more money over the long term.
So that led you to your pandemic project It sounds like the Full Body Yes was the book that you wrote during the pandemic. So it sounds like you're kind of already giving us some of the pitch, but can you give us the full pitch for that book?
Well, in that moment, I was the head of mindfulness compassion at LinkedIn, and people would ask me, what does that even mean, right? What does it mean to be compassionate at work? And so the book is trying to codify a little bit of that. It's a little bit of my story. It's a little bit of stories from other people. It's essentially, how do you be a compassionate person in the work environment, right? That question that we started with, that tear that we often, or that struggle that we often have. And so I set out to write, like, what does it mean to be compassionate? And in doing so, I realized, you know what? 90 or 99% of figuring out how to be compassionate is first dealing with our own mess, right? So my definition for compassion is, first of all, capacity, because our capacity ebbs and flows all the time. Capacity for three things: to be aware of the other person, to have a mindset of kindness or a mindset of wishing the best for the other person. And then the third one is the courage to take action. As I started kind of codifying things, I realized, oh, it's exactly the same thing for ourselves. And actually, that's the first step. First, how do we be aware of ourselves, right? How? And then two, how do we have a mindset of wishing the best for ourselves? In other words, how do we love ourselves? And then three is, how do we have the courage to take action when we see the gaps in our own lives, right? The courage to be at our best. And when we can do that, then we have a shot at doing it for somebody else. So the book is a set of stories. It's fun to read. It even won an award.
Nice. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a transformational project for me personally.
Scott, what are the spectrum of reactions to that book or the work when you take it to executives?
Well, some people, it depends on how they heard about me. If they've seen me speak, they're like, oh yeah, we could use some more of that. If they've just heard, oh, this guy was head of mindfulness, then they have their own perceptions about what that means.
Yeah.
Right? It's funny. I did a speaking event for a sales conference for a tech company, and it was an American East Coast company. And I showed up to the kind of meet and greet the night before. You know, and I live on the West Coast, and we're a little bit more casual in how we dress and our general attitude. And I show up at this thing, and every guy, and it's almost all guys, all older than me, you know, in a button-down shirt and a jacket. And I was looking around thinking, oh man, is my stuff going to play here? You know, is this going to work? My event was the next day, and I had a keynote, and then I taught a workshop. And I thought, you know what? I'm not going to make any assumptions. I'm just going to go all the way. And my thing included, I even did a little 5-minute, meditation or contemplation. And at the end of it, it was at Disney World. We got on the bus to go to dinner, and this guy sits down beside me, and he says, all right, you got me. I went, what? Hi, I'm Scott. He goes, yeah. When they introduced you, I thought, man, this is just going to be such a load of, you know what, right?
Yeah.
And he said, but you started talking, and I listened to you, and then I went to your workshop. And he goes, I got to tell you, brother, I'm all in. You got me. And so I think that no matter where people come from, I want to try to build a bridge to that place, right? Some people are all about it. They're already on board. They don't need convincing. And some people have no clue what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. But when I talk about it like an executive, when I talk about it from an operational or ROI perspective, then I see the heads wagging, and then I see the gears turning, and then it just becomes a prioritization process. And it requires also some soul searching for them. Do I actually care about my employees enough to do this? Do I actually care?
The prioritization piece is particularly interesting, and it's something I was actually sitting here thinking about, which is, it always feels like the thing that you can put off, right? Because it doesn't feel like, it's not, our calendars get filled up with back to back meetings. We convince ourselves that next week things will slow down a little bit, and I'll do my practices, right? And then we continually deprioritize it.
That's right.
So I got a 2-part question. I'm interested in which practices have you found have the most impact on high performing teams when done consistently? What's the like frequency of practice that's required to get there? And how can people start to think about reframing or breaking free from that cyclical trap that we get in, that I'll do it tomorrow, just like we say when we sign up for the gym in January, right? Like, I'm going to do it, and then we don't do it. Like, how do we solve for that?
Sure. Well, the same challenges we have as individuals are exactly the same challenges we have as organizations, right? Just like when we're busy, when you're the kid's Uber driver and you're chasing everybody around and you've got 6 deadlines and the bills are due and you're not sure how everything's going to come together, man, it's hard to do the self-care stuff. It's hard to find time because there's some really concrete things that need to get done. And to the spiritual practice, the mental well-being practices are longer term. And so we're animals, we're Homo sapiens. So we go to survival mode and we'll always choose survival over well-being. It requires us to break free of that. And so companies are the same way. When the company is trying to get to meet its quarterly objectives and trying to figure out how we're going to do this without layoffs and how we're going to meet, customers, blah, 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 blah. It's really hard to think about the long-term things for our employees, the nice to haves, or what we would categorize as nice to haves.
Yeah.
So first of all, it's characterizing it in seeing the importance over the long term, right? It's just like taking your vitamins or doing your health exercises. We can all do the hard things, but if you don't take care of yourself, at some point your health is going to fall apart, and then you're not going to be able to do the day-to-day, right? So you could say, okay, is it a vitamin or is it an emergency room? If we don't take the vitamins, we end up in the emergency room, right? In our personal lives, we end up having a heart attack or a divorce, right? At work, we end up with employees who leave the company, right? And when an employee leaves the company, it's the cost to replace that performance is somewhere between 150% and 250% of their annual salary. So if you're a leader and thinking about the long game and the long health of the organization, you're thinking about yourself and your employees from the long game. And so that's one way to think about it, is getting our minds right in how we prioritize. One of your questions was, what are the practices to create high-performing teams? And what actually works?
Yeah, which one?
So the single biggest factor, so Google did this Project Aristotle, I don't know now, 8 or 10 years ago. And I don't know what they were looking for or what they thought they would find, but they found that the single biggest factor in creating a high-performing team is not where you went to school or your level of IQ or if you're in the same room together. The single biggest factor is psychological safety. In other words, think about animal versus not animal. If I'm at work and I feel threatened, if I'm always worried that somebody's going to say something about me, or I might get fired, or I might get written up, or I might get whatever the thing is I'm worried about, like an animal, I'm cowering a little bit. Maybe not literally, but emotionally. And when we're like that, we're not creative. We're not open. We don't share information. But when we feel safe, then we get to expand. We're expansive. We're creative. We can bring forth solutions that may or may not work. We can innovate. We can interact with each other in healthy ways. So this is the single biggest thing. And there's lots of ways to create psychological safety, but it starts with a leader putting that on the list of things that are business critical, not nice to have. It's business critical. Just like the machine. My most important machine in a factory is the one in the corner generating 70% of income. For the team, the most important machine is, and I don't mean it crassly like that, the most important asset we have is the people. It's the team itself. And so how do I take care of the health of that machine? How do I create psychological safety so that they can be creative and get to where we need to go?
Both Scott and I have come across quite a few organizations who have gone down the path of rolling out mindfulness programs, for example, and found 6-12 months later, didn't work, didn't get adopted, became marginalized. and they divest from it. In your experience, what went wrong, and how could an organization planning to do, and it doesn't necessarily need to be mindfulness, but any of these kind of practices, how do you set the stage for this to be successful?
I think a lot of companies don't put enough oomph behind it. So they'll roll something out, and the rolling something out looks like, oh, hey, we're giving everybody a copy of Headspace or something like that. Insight Timer, pick your app. And then that's it. That's it. Well, when you're an employee, how do you even know about that? Right? There's at a company that has 10 or 15 or 150,000 people, you announce something once, and then the next week 1,000 more people started. They don't know anything about it. They're just like everything else, just like marketing to customers. You know, it takes 7 times to give a message to somebody before they hear it, before they internalize it. And in the same way, there needs to be this steady drumbeat, and not just coming from, oh, here's another thing that we do that's not right. Not just coming from HR or the wellness group. You know, the wellness person stands on stage and says, hey, so we got you a copy of Headspace. You know, we're really excited about it. And then you go back to the office and your boss is like, okay, we have these projects that are all due next Thursday, go. And no, we don't have time for anything. Which one are you going to listen to? Well, you're going to listen to your boss, right? But if your manager, your direct manager, is in your staff meeting talking about her own or his own experience using Headspace and why it's so important, and encouraging you to take time, whether it's using Headspace or in your own time, encouraging you to take time to take care of yourself. And everywhere you look, that message is consistent. Then it works. But when it comes from one place and the 1,000 other messages are inconsistent with it, of course it's not going to work. Why would it?
Let's stay with this for a second, because I'm thinking about our leaders that are listening right now. And not all of them will have decision-making authority to adopt a mindfulness program across the whole organization. And oftentimes, in much of my experience, I find that when leaders hear about what companies should be doing, they always think that's a different leader's job, right? Like that's not me, right? I'm not that. I just run this little area over here.
Sure.
So let's make this actionable for people who don't have the decision-making authority for the whole organization, where we might not get full adoption, right? But they're listening going, you know, I run a team of 10 people or whatnot. Like, I want to do this. How do I do this in a culture where maybe it's not accepted or, you know, espoused as something important, but I want to do it with my team. So it's going to be a little countercultural, and I think we're going to get some benefit, and I want to do it. What would you say to that leader?
So it starts with intention, and let's assume that they have that intention. And the intention is, I want to create psychological safety in my team, and I want for my employees to know that I care about their mental well-being. That even if the rest of the company doesn't seem like it cares, I care. I care deeply about it. And then I know that they'll work for me, regardless of what's going on around it. They'll work for us, our team. So that's a good place to start, right? So if I have that intention, what % of my staff meeting am I willing to spend on that? Because if I'm not willing to spend 5 minutes out of a 90-minute or 60-minute staff meeting, then it's just, those are lost words. I don't really mean it, right? But if I have that intention and I believe the things that we're talking about, then I'm willing to spend 3 minutes or 5 minutes, or maybe 15 minutes sometimes, not all the time. And in that 3 minutes, it could be something different every time. It could be like, hey guys, hey, I know that this last week has been crazy. It's been crazy for me. I just want to take a little break here. Like, I just want to check in and see how you all are doing. Like you all did at the beginning of this call. Right? Just check in, and an honest check-in. If it becomes rote, every time we check in, then it's just the same as everything else. It has to be meaningful. It's like, hey, Scott, hey, John, like, how are you doing today? No, really. How are you doing today? You know, and like, okay, well, sometimes I get, hey, how are you doing today? I'm fine. Oh, yeah? Well, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you doing? Like, I guess I'm a 6. All right, well, what are you normally? I guess I would say normally I'm like an 8. All right, well, if you care to share, like, what's going on? Like, what's What's the difference? What's the difference between your 6 and 8? And is there anything we can do to help you get to 8 or 10? And just the asking is not, it's not about putting a number on, it's not to quantify anything. The asking is just to say, hey man, I care about you. That's like that. All you have to do. And every once in a while, if you want to include mindfulness, it's like, you know what, let's just take 1 minute. Let's take 1 minute before we dive into, because I know you guys all came from back-to-backs. You're busy, you're stressed out. Let's just take a minute and just slow down before we dive into things, right? And if you want to just sit and space out, that's fine. But like, we're just going to take a minute. Just no devices. And just like, let's just calm down for a second. It's that kind of stuff. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to have gone through teacher training for mindfulness. It's just slowing down and showing that you care.
That alone has just had a bit of an impact on me.
Yeah. Yeah. And why? Go back to the why. Because we're animals. We're Homo sapiens. Our whole lives are spent in survival mode. Everything about our nervous system, everything about our survival systems is for survival. So it takes a lot to calm ourselves down and get out of survival mode and let our amygdalas be quiet for a while and let that other part of us evolve, right? So when I talk about my practice is trying to have a direct link to something bigger, that's what I'm talking about. I'm trying to let go of the body, let go of the mind, let go of emotion. And then it's what's left. Oh, I want to exercise that part. I want that part of me to be able to shine. I want that part of me to answer the question when you ask me instead of the nervous human part. And then I'll be at my best. And as a leader, if we can help people cultivate that, now we're talking about ROI. Now we're talking about amazing results, amazing people, amazing teams.
My experience of you on this call is that why you're credible amongst what might be a cynical audience or skeptical audience even, is that you truly have embodied this in your life. So this is not coming from an intellectual, you do understand it obviously, but it's coming from a total embodiment of it. So, it's apparent in you that you bring this into a situation. Many people aren't, because they are living in that survival world and they're in the struggle of trying to embrace it. And when they bring what might feel like a very counter-cultural, counterintuitive word like compassion into that space, that brings out a reaction in certain people that this is soft and it's maybe, provokes a kind of anti-entitlement reaction in some people.
This is a really important topic, actually. People, when we talk about compassion, we talk about treating people right, they go to that place. They go to say, as an example, I had a leader once, we're doing performance review. Every 6 months or every year, we do rankings and ratings, right? And we do performance reviews, and that's how your comp is decided. That's how we hand out bonuses and salary adjustments and promotions and all the things. And on their list of people was, I'll make a person up, Bobby. And Bobby last time had gotten a poor review, and Bobby, again, this leader was giving them a poor review. And so we were talking about it. It's like, well, what is happening? Like, why is Bobby still here? It's like, well, I really didn't want to give him this feedback because, I wanted to be compassionate. It's like, whoa, you have totally, and I mean totally, misconstrued what this whole compassion thing is all about. Right? Compassion is not letting Bobby slide being a poor performer. Compassion is addressing the problem, and it is a problem, addressing the problem directly with compassion. And so, to be honest, in that moment, the performance conversation then turned to that leader. It's like, oh, this is somebody I need to deal with, right? And deal with in a compassionate way. So compassion requires a level of courage as a person, as a leader, which is extraordinary. So think about your toughest conversations with your spouse, with your kids, with your partner, whoever. In those toughest conversations, you have to deal with things, right? But because you love them, you're trying to do it in the most compassionate way you can, but you still have to deal with it. And then think about situations where you didn't deal with it. You didn't deal with it. You let a really ugly thing pass by, a really thing that's not acceptable pass by, and ask yourself, was that compassionate to them or me? And the answer is no. Compassion requires a level of courage that is way beyond the norm. Way beyond the norm. So this is not soft. This is not some West Coast hippie feel-good thing. Like, this is how good results happen. And it requires a level, I'll say it again, it requires a level of courage most people don't have.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very powerful statement.
So you've built up a community of experts in your work you're doing, and I'd love to hear a little bit about that, about this network,
Sure.
And even the work that you're doing in the Inner MBA program. Tell us about that a little bit.
I'll touch on the Inner MBA first because it's easier to talk about. So Inner MBA is a 9-month program sponsored by Sounds True. In the beginning, it was Sounds True plus LinkedIn plus Wisdom 2.0 kind of got it up off the ground. And it's cool. It's basically 9 months of deep content and learning for folks that want to do the inner work, right? A lot of times as leaders, we're taught how to do the technical parts of our jobs, whether it's the finance or sales or support, whatever it is. This is the inner side. How do we deepen how do we change our mindset? How do we have compassion? And a huge, broad set of topics. So I'm an instructor as part of that. When I left LinkedIn 2.5 years ago, I started, I'd written the book. And so I was doing a lot of speaking and executive coaching and that sort of thing. And I still do that work. So, hey, look, if you're leading a company offsite and you need a speaker, hit me up. This is what I do. But I still had this mission. My mission is to change work from the inside out. And I realized I mean it, in its biggest form, 3.5 billion of us in the workplace. And so I realized pretty quickly, okay, well, I'm not going to make a very big dent in it all by myself. So let's do something together. And so I pulled together people just like me, coaches and podcasters and practitioners who were doing the work of conscious business. And my goal was to help all of them be more successful. And that's phase one. And, it's going well. We have 600 and something people in our community, just by word of mouth in the last few months.
Great.
But the next phase is the more important one, and that's to build a community of leaders and a community of just everybody who are interested in making work a better place. And so we're building content. So as an example, we're building content as those coaches, as those consultants together to codify what is conscious business and what are simple practices that leaders can put into place. So the project I'm most excited about is we're writing a book together. So 25 people all write one chapter, and we get it out in 5 months. And I hope to do a series of these. And interestingly enough, somebody reached out, one of our members, and they said, "This is awesome. I love it. This is what the Quakers do." And I went, "What? That's interesting." And they said, "Well, the Quakers, their relationship with the divine is more like a question instead of a knowing. And so they'll write together as a way of deepening their own understanding. So they'll write a book together as a way of deepening their personal understanding of the divine, their collective understanding of the divine, and they'll use that book as a way to spur the conversation both inside and outside of their community." And I thought, that's exactly what we're doing with this book and this movement, is that not any one of us has a corner on what does it mean to be conscious business. But if we all get together and talk about it and write about it and codify it and build things together, then we're expanding our own individual understanding, but also our collective understanding and bringing other people along for the journey. So we're just getting started, but I hope that if we did this in 2 years, we'd be talking about the 1 million members of people who have all joined, and we're all in it together.
Yeah, I love it.
Have you got a kind of a picture of what work might become in that period of time?
At the root, how we're different than a lot of things out there, because there's a lot of stuff out there. One is conscious business at the core, and two is community. We're built on this platform called Circle, which I appreciate. And so everything has a community aspect to it. Going back to that psychological safety, going back to this, like the power in finding our people. You know how it is, like when you go to a party or work, and there's people that just don't feel like my people, and then there's people that's like, oh, I feel comfortable around you, regardless of whatever else. This is a group that's like, oh, it feels like, oh, I'm safe here. I can be around my people. So everything has community in it. And so what I see over time is a place where the coaches can do their work, and we're bringing the leaders to them, and we'll have if John is a coach, it's like, okay, I'm bringing John 20 people, and then John can now do group coaching in, once a month or twice a month in a way that is natural and fits his work environment. And so everybody wins. These leaders get an experience to work with other leaders, but they also get it in an environment which is, which feels good and is led by someone who cares and is like-hearted. And over time, we all are energized by that experience and then bring it back to work. Here's what I realized. I talk about changing work from the inside out. There's a Rumi quote. I'm always dropping either Rumi or Hafiz, so there you go. The Rumi quote is, yesterday I was clever and I tried to change the world, but today I'm wise and I'm working on changing myself.
I love that quote.
And I'm aware of both things, right? So I want to change the world, but I know that to do it, the only way to do it is for each one of us to change ourselves, right? There's no war if there's peace in people's hearts, right? There's only compassion if people have compassion in their hearts. And so it's changing the world one person. It's changing work one person at a time.
So how is this work changing you? Like, I'd be curious, this work you're shaping.
Yeah.
Such a powerful sentiment to talk about this. And I think you're right. And so I'm curious, like, how has this been changing you over the past couple of years?
Yeah. Thank you for asking that. What I say all the time is that this work is how I serve. This is the work that I do. It's how I, make a living. But for sure, it's how I learn. And what I'm learning is, we're all works in progress, right? All of us. There's not a person on the planet who's not a work in progress. And for me, it's about the journey from me to we. I spent my whole, for sure, younger part of my life in achieve mode. And I achieved a lot. I'm good at achieving, right? I'm good at lots of things. And I spent my whole life trying to be good at things and achieving. And now I'm trying to build a movement, and that still feels like achieving. But the shift, and I'm telling you, I'm not there yet. The shift is moving from how is this about Scott and Scott's success to how is this about us and the result of the whole. And that's an ongoing challenge. I have 30 years of learning how to make money, right? And I'm trying to use the good parts of learning that, but letting go of the not so good parts of learning how to do that. And it's hard. The inertia part is hard, right? So I am learning every day what it means to be a servant of the whole instead of a servant of myself. And I'm still working on it.
I know it's a big question, but how in your vision of consciousness does AI play a part? What's your feelings about that?
I go back and forth about being terrified and excited by AI, and probably as we all should. I don't know yet, but here's the thing. What I do know, like every other new technology, like the atomic bomb, like the internet, like the phone, like everything, is that we as a people, as a species, will use AI as our consciousness is. In other words, we have a total range of consciousness. There's some people who are, this is not the right words, but they are good versus bad. Some people will use it for evil. Some people use it for greatness. So I listened to this guy talk the other day about communicating with whales, and how AI could help us communicate with animals. And I thought, that's so cool. I want to talk to a whale. I want to talk to the birds in my backyard. I want to talk to my cat. But then he went on to talk about, well, maybe this is not such a great idea.
Yeah.
Because these whales have had societies. They've had language for 300 million years. And comparatively, we're just a speck in the evolutionary food chain. So what if we start talking to them and we mess up their patterns, right? We give them wrong information. And I thought, oh, interesting. This whole thing with AI, with every other technology, just because we can doesn't mean we should.
Yeah.
So we will use it as our consciousness is. And I hope that we grow in consciousness to use it for good reasons. I hope that AI can help us with our consciousness. Imagine that.
Yeah. To be in a positive symbiotic relationship with anything requires us to recognize that every technology is just the use of the technology will just be a reflection of our base motivation,
That's
better
right.
or worse. So that's a beautiful place to bring it to a close, I think.
Yeah. Well, thank you for this, Scott. Certainly appreciate your time, and thank you for the work that you're doing in the world, because it matters a lot and it's appreciated.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And if you are listening and care to join us in our little movement, hopefully turning into a big movement, come check us out at changingwork.org. And feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I love to hear from people. I respond to every single person, so please do reach out. I would love to hear from you.
Excellent. Well, we'll put all that in the show notes. And do take Scott up on his offer. I highly recommend it. And until next time, folks, remember, the world is evolving. Are you?